Hey everyone, so you know how sometimes you stumble upon a book that just clicks, that makes you look at your entire life differently? Well, for me, one of those books is absolutely Peter F. Drucker's Managing Oneself. It's a classic from the Harvard Business Review. And honestly, if you're a knowledge worker, or really anyone navigating modern life, this isn't just a good read, it's pretty much essential. I picked it up because I kept hearing it cited everywhere, and once I started, I quickly realized why it's so impactful. Drucker kicks things off by saying something super counterintuitive. Most of us think we know what we're good at, but we're usually wrong. More often, we just know what we're not good at. And yet, he insists, you can only really perform from strength. You can't build success on your weaknesses. This really hit me. So how do you figure out your actual strengths? His answer is brilliant and surprisingly simple feedback analysis. Seriously, this is gold. He says, whenever you make a big decision or take a major action, write down what you expect to happen. Then, 9 to 12 months later, check back. Compare what actually happened with your initial expectations. He's been doing this for decades, and he's still surprised by what he learns about himself. For him, it revealed an intuitive understanding of technical people but a lack of resonance with generalists. This ancient method, apparently invented by a 14th century German theologian and later used by Calvin and Loyola to build their world-dominating institutions, will quickly show your true strengths, what stops you from using them fully, where you're not competent, and where you have no talent at all. From this, Drucker gives us 3 clear actions. First, concentrate on your strengths, put yourself where they can shine. Second, work on improving your strengths, filling knowledge gaps or acquire new skills. And third, and this was a bit tough, overcome your intellectual arrogance. You know, those moments where you're brilliant in one area but totally dismiss knowledge in others, like engineers who pride themselves on not understanding people, or her folks who ignore basic accounting. That's self-defeating, he argues. Also, and this is crucial, feedback analysis will quickly highlight your bad habits, those things that totally inhibit your effectiveness, like a brilliant planner who never follows through on their plans. Oh, and he also points out the importance of manners. Simple things like please and thank you. Apparently, if someone's brilliant work constantly fails due to lack of cooperation, it's often a sign of poor courtesy. Finally, it tells you what not to do. Don't waste energy trying to turn incompetence into mediocrity. That's far harder than turning competence into excellence. Next, he dives into a fascinating question. How do I perform? It sounds simple, right? But most people have no idea, and even worse, they don't realize that different people perform differently. And forcing yourself to work in ways that aren't your ways is a recipe for disaster. Your way of performing is unique, deeply tied to your personality, and pretty much a given. You can tweak it, but you can't really change it fundamentally. He gives us some great questions here. First, are you a reader or a listener? This one blew my mind with his examples. Think about Dwight Eisenhower. As Supreme Commander, he was a press darling, commanding his conferences with polished answers. But as President, the same journalists ridiculed him for rambling. The difference, as Commander, his aides made sure questions were written down beforehand. He was a reader. As President, he tried to emulate his predecessors Ford and Truman, both listeners and never even heard the questions. Similarly, Lyndon Johnson, a superb senator who was a listener, kept a staff of brilliant writers inherited from reader John Kennedy. Johnson never understood their memos, contributing to his downfall. The takeaway: if you try to be something you're not, you're going to fail. Then how do you learn? Schools, Drucker argues, teach as if there's only one way to learn, which is torture for those who learn differently. Some, like Winston Churchill, learn by writing. They'd even learn by writing notes and sketchbooks, never looking at them again but never forgetting. Others learn by doing or even by hearing themselves talk, like a CEO he knew who'd talk to his staff for hours to figure things out. Most people actually know how they learn, but they rarely act on that knowledge. Acting on it is key. He also pushes us to ask, do I work well with people, or am I a loner? And if with people, in what relationship? General George Patton, a brilliant troop commander, was the best subordinate but would have been the worst independent commander. Some thrive as team members, others alone. Some are great mentors, others aren't. Are you a decision maker or an advisor? Many excel as advisors but can't handle the pressure of making the final call. This is often why a great number 2 fails as a number 1. Finally, do you perform well under stress or need a structured environment? Big organization or small? People who thrive in one often flounder in the other. The big message here: don't try to change yourself. Instead, focus on improving how you perform and avoid work that doesn't fit your natural style. This brings us to a surprisingly deep question: what are my values? He's quick to clarify. This isn't about ethics. Ethics, he says, are universal, and the test is simple: the mirror test. Do you want to see a pimp in the mirror when you shave? Like that German ambassador who resigned rather than attended keys to tasteful dinner? No, ethics are clear, but values go beyond that. They're about what truly matters to you. Drucker explains that working in an organization whose values are incompatible with your own is a recipe for frustration and non-performance. He gives the example of a human resources executive who deeply believed in promoting from within. But her new company prioritized fresh blood from outside. Neither approach is wrong, but they are fundamentally incompatible values, leading to her eventual financially costly resignation. Or consider pharmaceutical companies: one values constant small improvements, another risky breakthroughs. Or businesses run for short-term results versus long-term growth. Even churches differ on whether success is measured by new parishioners or spiritual growth. Organizations, like people, have values. Your values don't need to be identical to the organization's, but they must be compatible enough to coexist. Here's the kicker: your strengths and performance rarely conflict, but your values and strengths can. You might be incredibly good at something, even successful, but if it doesn't align with your values, you won't feel it's worth dedicating your life to. Drucker himself experienced this, leaving a successful investment banking career because he valued people over being the richest man in the cemetery. He asserts values are and should be the ultimate test. Once you understand your strengths, how you perform, and your values, you're finally equipped to answer, where do I belong? Most people, especially highly gifted ones, don't figure this out until their mid-20s, but once they have those 3 answers, they can decide. More accurately, they can decide where they don't belong. If you know you don't do well in big organizations, you should say no to a job there. If you're not a decision maker, say no to that assignment. This self-knowledge empowers you not just to say no, but to say, yes, I'll do that, but this is how it worked. This is how it should be structured. These are the results you can expect, because this is who I am. It's about being prepared for opportunities, not planning a rigid career. And then he moves to a question that was virtually unheard of until recently for most people: what should I contribute? Historically, people were told what to do, but knowledge workers, we have to ask this. To answer, you need to consider 3 things. What does the situation require? Given my strengths, performance, and values, how can I make the greatest contribution? And what results need to be achieved to make a difference? He shares the example of a hospital administrator who decided his contribution would be to transform the sloppy emergency room within 2 years, making it a model for the country. Drucker suggests that a plan for contribution shouldn't look too far ahead, usually no more than 18 months, and the results should be challenging but achievable, meaningful, visible, and measurable. Now, this part is incredibly important: responsibility for relationships. Most of us don't work alone, we work with others, and managing yourself means taking responsibility for these relationships. The first part is realizing that other people are just as individual as you are. They have their own strengths, their own ways of getting things done, and their own values. So, to be effective, you must know these things about your coworkers. He gives the classic example of someone trained to write reports for a reader boss, then continuing to write reports for a listener boss, failing every time because they didn't bother to understand their new boss's performance style. Bosses aren't just titles, they're individuals, and it's your job to adapt to what makes them most effective. This applies to all coworkers too. Everyone has their own best way of working. The secret to effectiveness, he says, is understanding the people you work with and depend on. so you can leverage their strengths and styles. The second part is about communication. Drucker, as a consultant, says the first thing he hears in organizations are personality conflicts. Most of these arise simply because people don't know what others are doing, how they work, or what contributions they're focused on. And why don't they know? Because they haven't asked and therefore haven't been told. In the past, this wasn't necessary because everyone in a district often did the same work. But today, we work with people doing vastly different tasks. So it's the marketing rep's job to make sure her team understands her goals. And it's the specialist's job to make sure she understands their work. Drucker emphasizes that people often hold back from asking these questions, fearing they'll seem presumptuous or stupid, but he assures us, every time he or his clients have gone to colleagues and said, "This is what I'm good at, this is how I work, these are my values, this is the contribution I plan to concentrate on," the response is always, "This is most helpful, but why didn't you tell me earlier?" And if you then ask them the same questions about their strengths, values, and contributions, the reaction is equally positive. "Thanks for asking me, but why didn't you ask me earlier?" Organizations today are built on trust, not force, and trust means understanding each other. Taking this responsibility for relationships is not just a good idea, it's an absolute necessity. A duty. Finally, Drucker tackles something incredibly prescient for our times, the second half of your life. Back when most work was manual labor, people just kept doing it, and if they survived 40 years, they were happy to retire. But knowledge workers aren't finished at 40, they're often just bored. That midlife crisis we hear about, he says it's mostly boredom. After 20 years, they're good at their jobs, but they're no longer learning or feeling challenged, and they still have 25 years of work ahead. This is why managing oneself increasingly means preparing for a second career. He outlines 3 ways to approach this. One is to actually start a second career. This could be a lateral move to a different type of organization, like a corporate controller moving to a medium-sized hospital, or a complete pivot, like a business executive becoming a minister at 45. Or a manager going to law school after 20 years in corporate life to become a small-town attorney. These people bring substantial skills and know-how, meeting challenge, and a sense of community. Another way is to develop a parallel career. Many successful people stay in their main job but dedicate another 10 hours a week to a second, often non-profit role. Think running a church administration, the presidency of the local Girl Scouts Council, or a better women's shelter. And finally, you have the social entrepreneurs. These are folks who love their first career but it no longer challenges them fully. They might reduce time on their original work while building a new nonprofit venture. He mentions his friend Bob Buford, for example, who still runs a successful TV company but also built 2 successful nonprofits. The crucial prerequisite for any of these paths: you must begin long before you enter the second half of your life. If you don't start volunteering before 40, you likely won't at 60. The successful lawyer he cites started volunteer legal work for schools at 35, joined the school board at 40, and started his own venture to build model schools at 50. All while still working nearly full-time as lead counsel. And there's another very human reason to cultivate a second major interest. Early life throws curveballs. An engineer passed over for promotion at 45, a professor realizing they won't get tenure at a big university. Or family tragedies. A second major interest, not just a hobby, can make all the difference, providing a sense of success, contribution, and community when your main path hits a wall. In a society that demands everyone be a success, which is impossible because success implies failure, having these options is vital for individual well-being and family stability. So, managing oneself might seem like common sense on the surface, or even a bit naive, but Drucker argues that it demands new, unprecedented things from us, especially from knowledge workers. In essence, it requires us to think and behave like a chief executive officer of our own lives. The old assumptions that organizations outlive workers and people stay put are no longer true. Knowledge workers are mobile and outlive organizations. This need to manage ourselves isn't just a trend, it's creating a revolution in human affairs. For me, the biggest takeaway is how empowering this book is. It's not about changing who you are, but about deeply understanding yourself and aligning your life with that understanding. It's about taking proactive responsibility for your trajectory, your effectiveness, and your well-being both personally and professionally. If you feel like you're drifting or just want to maximize your impact, or even if you're just curious about what makes people truly effective, pick up Managing Oneself. It's a short read, but its ideas will stick with you and challenge you to think about your career and life in a whole new, much more intentional way. Trust me, you'll thank yourself later.